Good afternoon. This is Amber Lewis at the Iowa Finance Authority, and you have joined the Iowa Statewide Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG program application training webinar. This is training and information for the calendar year 2014 competition. So we will go ahead and begin. And actually just a quick check on our technology. If you can hear me talking and see our screen, if you would please let us know by submitting a quick note in the questions or the chat box to the right of your screen, that would be terrific. Okay, looking like things are good so far. We do have everybody muted, and that's because the webinar technology, it always seems like there's lots of feedback and distractions on the phone if we unmute everybody. So unfortunately, we'll probably go with that format for most of the webinar. Okay, great. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining. Okay. We'll go ahead and begin. Also with me today is my colleague Josh McRoberts at ISA. And just briefly about today's webinar, it will be recorded if technology cooperates. And so we will post slides and a recording of the webinar online at our website at iowafinanceauthority.gov. To get to our ESG page, you can click on one of the top drop-down lists to get to one of the homelessness pages, and from there find the link on the left for the Emergency Solutions Grant. And info about this particular competition will be under the link for the 2014 program. The webinar today is not mandatory to apply. It is just intended to be helpful, so hopefully it is. Information presented on federal regulations is based on our current interpretation and understanding, which we're always learning more about this program. It's neither intended to substitute nor fully explain the full federal regulations. So that's our disclaimer. Our webinar today will be followed by opportunities for questions and answers. We'll see how the audio does, but we may just focus on questions that are submitted through the question box with the webinar. And so you can submit your questions at any time using the tab on the right-hand side. Oh, and our presenters today, actually we do not have Judy Hartman, so it will just be myself and Josh McRoberts. Okay, we will do a brief overview of what is ESG. We will look at what is this ESG competition for and who should apply. We'll touch on how is the competition different from last year's. We'll look at the application process this year and next steps. Okay, first of all, what is ESG? The purpose of the ESG program is a federal program of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Purpose is to assist people to quickly regain stability in permanent housing after experiencing a housing crisis and or homelessness. So you can find out lots more information about the ESG program through this link. That gets you to the federal pages about the ESG program. Okay, as I said, it's a program of HUD. HUD awards formula grants to states and some metropolitan cities on the basis of the CDBG formula. And it is authorized by the McKinney-Vento Act originally, reauthorized in 2009 under the Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing Act, or HART Act. And the HART Act changed it from, it used to be known as the Emergency Shelter Grant Program, and now, of course, it's the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. The HART Act required HUD to develop new regulations for ESG, a new homeless definition, and new regulations for several other grant programs. These new federal ESG interim regulations became effective January 4th, 2012. So we've had them for about a year. They're still the interim regulations. We don't have the final regulations, but they are in effect. So that's what we have to operate by. The focus on the federal interim regulations is on quickly helping people to regain permanent housing. A little bit less of an emphasis than in the past on emergency shelter. ESG in Iowa. In Iowa, there are 3 total federal grants through ESG made each year. There's one to the state, and that's what we're talking about today. There's one to the city of Des Moines and one to the city of Sioux City. So the Iowa Finance Authority is the agency responsible for Iowa's state allocation of formula ESG funds. And as the grantee, IFA is responsible for distributing and monitoring the use of funds. As for this particular calendar year 2014 competition, just a little bit about how we developed the competition. We did so with stakeholder input. Primary way that we did this was through a 2-week public comment period where we released the draft application and materials in just the draft form for comments. We also had an open public meeting for oral comments. And we reviewed all the comments received, and we posted all the comments and our responses to the comments online at that same place referenced earlier for ESG materials on the ISO website. We really appreciate the comments that we received from our stakeholders. I always think they're very helpful in coming up with the best application that we can. Eligible applicants, units of general purpose local government, not to include public housing agencies, that's federal rule, or private nonprofit agencies can apply. Projects must serve clients that qualify as homeless or at risk of homelessness. And HUD has definitions for both of those terms. They're pretty specific. The deadline for applications, July 12, 2013 at 4:30 p.m. The system is set to shut down after 4:30 p.m. as in not take applications past that point. So please, if you can, get them in early. Early is better. It avoids any possibility of technical delays or problems. And if you run into questions as you're doing the application, that allows you time to ask us as well. The award period for this competition is going to be January 1st, 2014 through December 31st, 2014. Just a straight calendar year. Grant awards and amounts. The source of our 2014 calendar year funds is federal fiscal year 2013 allocation, which was just announced maybe about 2 weeks ago. HUD announced the ESG allocations nationally for fiscal year 2013. As far as the sequestration and any questions about that, the sequestration will not further affect what HUD has said will be available for the 2013 allocation. The 2013 allocation already took into account about a 5% reduction from sequestration. For this competition, we have approximately $2 million available. It's possible we'll have some carryover, some unexpended funds from the current calendar year awards that would be added on to next year's awards, but we won't know what amount or how much or if any of that is available until later on. Most likely we would just add on a percentage to everybody's awards if we do end up having money available. We will make between 20 to 40 awards is our projection, assuming that sufficient number of eligible applications come in. And we anticipate that the average of awards will be somewhere between $50,000 to $100,000 each. There isn't necessarily an application minimum and maximum, but the average there is meant to provide a guideline. If an agency is far below or far above, we would expect to see some unique circumstances or reasons provided in the application for that, and we could consider that. Generally, we will accept only one application per agency, And if it's a nonprofit agency, it must be recognized independently by the Iowa Secretary of State's office. So you can find that out by a search online, and there's a link in the application to do so. So generally that means an agency might have different branch, satellite, sort of outreach locations, or different even shelter locations. Really, we're just accepting one application per agency in almost every case. The application will be competitive, and our plan is that at least 50% of funds will be dedicated to rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention. And we'll get into in a little bit what the different eligible categories of assistance are. These are 2 of them, and we do plan to reserve 50% of funds for these activities. At least 50%, I should say.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. As Amber said, there's different eligible activities, and for purposes of this program, street outreach, which would include essential services for unsheltered homeless persons, includes connecting persons with emergency shelter, housing, or critical services, providing urgent, non-facility-based care to unsheltered homeless persons who are unwilling or unable to access emergency shelter, housing, or an appropriate health facility. Category 1 of HUD's definition of homelessness: engagement, case management, emergency health services, emergency mental health services, and transportation.
And just to add something real quick there, that category 1, that's meant to convey that eligible persons served by street outreach have to meet the category of, or meet the definition of category 1 for HUD's homelessness definition. Hopefully that makes sense.
Shelter would include essential services for clients, which would be case management, child care, education services, employment assistance and job training, outpatient health services, legal services, life skills training, mental health services, substance abuse treatment, transportation, and services for special populations. Operations for emergency shelters, including maintenance, rent, security, fuel, equipment, insurance, utilities, food, furnishings, and supplies, and can also include hotel or motel vouchers if no emergency shelter is available. And this is for categories 1, 2, 3, or 4 of HUD's definition of homelessness. Did you have something to say? Okay. Transitional housing or shelter. The interim regulations define emergency shelter to include a hold harmless provision for transitional shelter or housing projects if they were funded with federal FY 2010 ESG funds. For the Iowa Statewide ESG program, federal FY 2010 ESG funds were allocated for the period from July 1 through December 31st, 2010. Essentially, such projects are grandfathered in for eligibility as emergency shelters. If they meet all other qualifications, such projects may apply in the shelter category. Homelessness prevention and/or rapid rehousing. The homelessness prevention is categories 2, 3, or 4 of HUD's definition of homelessness.
And we'll just go ahead and click through to where HUD will provide us with a little bit more information about their homeless definition. And one moment here. Okay, if you haven't seen this resource and you're looking into the ESG program, this was pretty helpful. This talks about HUD's 4 categories, which we've referenced now a couple times. Just important when you're thinking about whether you're providing eligible services to know that the clients you're proposing to serve with your program do fit into one of the eligible categories here. So we have the criteria for determining homelessness from HUD, and then we have the record-keeping requirements as well for each category. Okay, and then just to move on here, the HUD's definition of at risk of homelessness. This also applies if you're doing homelessness prevention. And just to click through and see what we have available here. 1 minute. You have to get to this a different way here. There we go. Okay, this is HUD's definition of at risk of homelessness. They've got 3 categories for at risk. It's pretty specific, pretty in-depth, especially for this first category, so I won't read through here, but just to know that this is a reference that's available online. Certainly you can access it through the slides or directly through HUD's one CPD page or HUD HRE page dedicated to the ESG program. Oh, let's see, where are we? Sorry about that. Oh, back to our slides. And back to where we were. Okay. And then finally, rapid rehousing just fits category 1 of HUD's definition of homelessness. So those are the clients that are eligible there. Just a quick note, category 4, which is fleeing domestic, a domestic violence situation could be eligible, but the way HUD describes it is only if the client is also eligible under category 1. So I think category 1 for the most part captures that.
Moving on with other eligible activities with homelessness prevention and or rapid rehousing will include rental assistance, housing relocation and stabilization services, including financial assistance costs, short, medium-term rental arrears, rental application fees, security deposits, last month's rent, utility deposits and utility payments, and moving costs, and service costs, which would be housing search and placement, housing stability case management, mediation, legal services, and credit repair. So the ESG program is very regulation heavy, and agencies that apply for ESG must be prepared to meet significant requirements of compliance if awarded funds. Examples of additional requirements for agencies providing assistance: for shelters, there's lead-based paint visual assessments and compliance, habitability standards, prohibition against involuntary family separation based on the ages of children. For homelessness prevention and or rapid rehousing, for all types of assistance provided, income calculations and limitations, no more than 30% area median income. There's an exception at intake for rapid rehousing assistance only. Monthly case management requirements, client recertifications for ongoing assistance, restrictions on use with other subsidies, limitation on period of assistance, lead-based paint visual assessment and compliance, and habitability standards. Additional requirements if rental assistance is provided include fair market rent, rent reasonableness, rental assistance agreement, and leases. And there's more. Key additional program requirements include data collection and reporting, matching contributions, documentation of homelessness, at risk of homelessness, confidentiality, accessibility, termination of assistance, coordination with other homeless services, access to mainstream services and resources, requirements for religious organizations, coordinated assessment, which is not yet in effect, involvement of homeless individuals, and development of standardized written policies and procedures. And there's still more. Additional federal requirements include non-discrimination and equal opportunity, fair housing requirements, non-discrimination by age, affirmative action, affirmative outreach, job training and employment for low-income residents, uniform administrative requirements, Solid Waste Disposal Act, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, Drug-Free Workplace, and limitation on contracting. Data collection and reporting requirements. Agencies must collect data on all clients served. They must enter data in the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS. If a domestic violence victims services agency, you must collect data in a comparable database instead of HMIS. You must follow confidentiality and security policies for data collection. And an ESG annual performance report, known as an APR. DV agencies report information directly and may contain more performance measures than in the past. Okay, as stated, for ESG, there is a match that's required and is often challenging. Matching contributions must be one-to-one match, and that's required. It can be cash or non-cash. Sources and uses. Matching contributions must meet all requirements of the ESG program and must be used on the ESG program. ESG and the Shelter Assistance Fund. The federal ESG rules are more restrictive. The program requirements are stricter. More documentation is required, and there's more limitations on who can be served. The Iowa Finance Authority will hold a SAF competition later in the year, and it will likely be in September. Only agencies that do not receive an ESG award may apply for SAF. Some agencies may choose to wait and only apply for SAF. With costlier compliance requirements of ESG, some agencies may find that SAF would be a better fit for their programs.
Okay, and I'm just going to stop there for a moment. Before we move into the application process, I'd like to check in with any questions that relate to the sections we've just covered. So bear with us for just a moment. We're just scrolling through the questions that have been, or the comments or questions that have been received, and mostly they're just relating to being able to see the webinar. That's good. Question of the webinar slides available to download. They're not right now, but they will be posted afterwards. There was a question here about what can be used for match, and we didn't go into it in too much detail here, but just really briefly, match is fairly open as to what can be used as a source. You can use other HUD funds, you can use other federal grant funds, you can use state grant funds, and you can use local grant funds. You can use private foundation funds. You could use private contributions, private individual contributions. You could also use non-cash contributions, such as the value of a building, of a donated building, or volunteer hours can also be counted as match, and there's no set rate for volunteer hours. You would instead use whatever the going rate is for the kind of volunteer work that a person is doing. And you could use just online job search tools and position descriptions to figure out what a reasonable rate might be, and then just document that. So you could also use, if you're a shelter and you're providing, if you're applying for shelter funds for ESG, and perhaps you receive contributions in the form of supplies or food, or equipment for your to support your shelter operations, then those things could be counted at their fair market value in meeting the match requirements. So it is pretty extensive what can be used for match. However, the big catch is that anything used for match or anything used as a source of match has to then also be used for the ESG program and has to follow all the same requirements as the ESG program. So that can be kind of a complicated thing. If you get separate foundation funds that are pretty open, that might be easier. But if you have other federal funds that come with their own requirements, that can be difficult to kind of match up the requirements from that program with the requirements for ESG. So it does get a little difficult there. There is some more further information on our Iowa Finance Authority ESG webpage. The specific guidance we have from HUD on match is fairly limited still to what's in the regulation, which is just about 3 short paragraphs on match. And so we have just a little more information from FAQs that HUD has answered for us, and we posted a couple of the key ones on our ESG page. So we'd be happy if anybody has specific questions to take them offline after the webinar, but that's just is to provide a kind of a brief overview there of what can be used for match. And a question if we could post the website for the slides after the webinar. It will just be found on our main ESG webpage from the Iowa Finance Authority. And again, it should be fairly straightforward to find our ESG page from the ISA main website at iowafinanceauthority.gov. There are about 3 or 4 different drop-down boxes at the top of that web page, and any one of them will get you to a page related to homelessness. And from there should be a direct link to the ESG program. A question about LIHEAP. Will LIHEAP be allowed toward an agency match? And the answer there is yes in some circumstances. For an agency that provides LIHEAP assistance directly, that's the most straightforward way to do this. And even though the best way to do this is if you have a client who is being served by ESG and they're also going to receive LIHEAP assistance, then yes, that would be fairly straightforward to use that LIHEAP portion for to contribute to the ESG match. It gets a little more difficult if you're an agency where your clients may benefit from LIHEAP, but you don't provide the LIHEAP directly. We really don't have a way right now to pull in third-party matches in that way. And it gets a little difficult. You probably can't use your entire LIHEAP program because not all clients served by LIHEAP would actually qualify under ESG regulations, such as the 30% income requirement. Question, can we use the value of other case management services as match? And I think if you're providing case management for your ESG clients, but you're providing that case management through another funding source, then yes. But again, any case management, it just would need to be provided for clients that qualify under the ESG program and rules. And there's a request here, can we point out if there are completely different questions this year from last year? And so I assume that pertains to the actual application, which we will get to in just a little bit. Okay, and I think a couple more questions here mostly relate to the actual application. So we will go ahead and move on and get to those in just a little bit. Okay, the HAP system. This is our Homeless Assistance Program. It's what we call our online system used to submit applications for both the ESG program and also the Shelter Assistance Fund program. If you've applied for those programs in the last 2 years, then you've used this system, so it should be familiar. We've just made a few updates each year. To access the HAP system, there's a link here which we'll follow in just a moment. From the, if you get to that ESG page that I was referencing, you want to click on Forms and Resources, which is on the right, top right, and under the 2014 program, you can find the link to the online application, or if you have your slides open here, which will be posted on that page as well, you can get to it through this link. We'll go back to this in just a moment. Click through. So the first thing you're going to want to do is actually set up a HAP system account if you don't have one already. Perhaps if you've applied before you have one, you can use that same login information to get back into your account. If you've forgotten your login information, it gives you a couple prompts to find out. And let's see. We'll go ahead and go through a couple more slides here before we actually look at the application. So new and different. Application scoring and bonus points. For the regular application, we will have 100 points, which is the same as last year. However, this year we will have the option for an additional 20 priority bonus points. And so that gives us a total of actually 120 points possible. Not every agency is going to qualify for those bonus points, but they are out there in some cases, and just reference items that are particularly important to us and to the program this year. So as for what are these competition priorities, first we have services for families with children, which is worth up to 3 points. We have veterans, services for veterans, also worth up to 3 points. Services for the chronically homeless, worth up to 3 points. We have continuity of ESG services and grant management, also up to 3 points. And finally, we have the prior grant utilization or need for funds for 5 points. And so these priorities are all laid out in the application in more detail, but this is just to provide a quick overview. Okay, and we will actually go back here to our link and review the application at this time. And so when you first click through to the system, you'll see this page, and this is where you just log in. If you don't have an account yet, you'd want to follow this link to create one. And I'm just going to log in here, and hopefully it'll let me through. And I created this account as though I were an applicant. And I created this just recently, and so I already have an application here. If you just get into the system for the first time, you're not going to have anything showing up down there, and what you want to do then is follow this link that kind of hides here on the top left for to add a new application. So I don't need to do that because I already have one here, so here I'm just going to go in and edit my application. So when you first get into the system, it's actually going to show all red X's on the left. And the reason that mine shows a couple checks now is just because I've gone into those sections already, and they actually don't have any required questions. So once I exit out, the system tells me nothing more is required for that page. So first we have general information, and this provides most of the same information that we've gone over already in the webinar. And just scrolling down, there's just a couple items that we didn't cover earlier in the webinar. We do have an application deficiency review period, and we also did that last year. It will take place following the application deadline. We will first review all the applications for curable technical deficiencies, and that would just include things like missing required documentation. Like maybe you have an exhibit, you meant to upload your 990 and instead you uploaded something else by accident, or maybe you just uploaded one page, or maybe you uploaded something and it's in a file format that we're just not able to open and view. So we will contact you and let you know if that's the situation, and there will be that option to resolve the technical deficiencies. And the agencies will be allowed 1 week to correct those deficiencies. As far as how you'll find out, I believe the system sends an email to the person who has actually submitted the application. So you want to make sure that that if you have, say, a grant writer working on your application for you, that they're going to be in touch if they receive an email about it, that it's going to come to the right person for information about an application deficiency. Application training webinar, that's today. We have some application directions. That's mostly about just navigating through the system, which we'll just cover briefly here. And if you do have application or program questions during the process, you can email myself, amber.lewis@iowa.gov. Here's my email address. Or you can email Josh McRoberts at iowa.gov. And we will do our best to answer your questions. If possible, we will post some questions online. If we receive some questions multiple times, perhaps we'll develop a list of frequently asked questions and post them online. And let's see, to ensure a response before the application deadline, final questions should be submitted at least 72 hours in advance of the application deadline. So don't wait until the very last day with questions. and that will just ensure that we get to your questions before the deadline. And if you do have questions about the federal ESG program, you're, of course, certainly always welcome to submit them directly to HUD. HUD has their HUD help desk available for this purpose, and they certainly don't make any guarantees as to how quickly they will respond to questions. Sometimes they're in a couple days, and sometimes it's weeks or months, or I'm sure I have some that are going on years now. But they do have this function here, so you can click through. And then I think it's not listed here, but something that's new this year, we will have an application confirmation email. So that will go to the same person who's actually submitted your application, similar to that application deficiency email. That notice will go to the person who submits and lets them know that it really was successfully submitted. So you're going to want to save that email. That becomes your proof of submission. So save that, hold on to that, and then you know that you're good and your application went through. And then once you submit it, it's closed for further changes. Okay, so as far as navigating through the application, you just follow the links at the left here. You also have the links up top here if you want to save and exit, or print at any time. If it helps you to be able to print a blank application up front, you can do that through this print function here. And some applicants may wish to also work on a Word version of their application first and then just copy and paste into the application. The system doesn't allow spell check or anything like that, so that can be a benefit to working on the project outside the system and then copying and pasting your info. So first we have applicant name and location, pretty straightforward. See the little stars, that means that questions required. It's helpful for your contact information to provide more than one person. Very helpful. But some people leave the organization sometimes. Maybe their contact information changes. I would recommend at least 2 people for the organization contact information here. And that's helpful for us and can be helpful for you to make sure we stay in communication with the right people. Here we have threshold items for our next section. And this section has just been updated a bit. Just a note here, if you're a transitional housing or shelter provider, on how you may or may not be eligible. So read that carefully, please. A note here about a completed independent financial audit or completed independently reviewed financial statements. These are required. They need to be performed by a certified public accountant and reflect financial activity at least through August 31st, 2011. So that may seem like kind of a random date, but our intent there is that allows about 10 months after the end of a fiscal year to submit an audit, which should be plenty of time, should be more than enough time in almost every case. And so I recognize that most agencies don't have fiscal years that end then, but in any case, whatever financial statements you submit, they need to at least reflect financial activity through that date to be considered current. So this question is meant to make sure that you've got that covered. And so just a note on the level of financial statement that's required. This is a frequent question that we get. We don't require a full-blown audit, which I know can be thousands of dollars and is more than some agencies really need if they're a smaller agency. However, we do require more than just the compilation report. The compilation report is just essentially putting the financial statements in a recognizable kind of standard form, but it doesn't entail a review at all. So what we're going for here is sort of this middle level where we're requiring at least reviewed financial statements. So it means somebody else outside your organization, independent of your organization, so not a board member, somebody who's a CPA and is independent of your organization has reviewed your financial statements. So something to keep in mind there. As far as these other questions, pretty basic, just about what kinds of services you're going to provide and who your target demographic or population is and where you will provide services. This last question, we've changed the functionality of this question a little. So if you're serving multiple counties, you should be able to use either the control or shift keys to highlight multiple counties there. Project design. And this section has undergone just a few updates as well. We want to know how many clients is your project proposed to serve with the funding requested, and how was the number determined, including your anticipated cost per client per type of service. And I saw one question we already received on the webinar was essentially, what are we after? What are we looking for? What do we consider realistic or good cost per client? And I think it just depends so much on the kind of service that you're proposing to offer, and so much on the kind of demographic or typical barriers that your clients face. So we really don't have a target number in mind there, but we do just, there was some debate about whether we would keep this question in there, and we decided to keep it in there because we just think cost is so important. So even though it's only worth 2 points, we want agencies to be thinking about what the services they're providing are costing, and providing kind of a rationale or justification for how many clients it's reasonable to serve with the amount of funds requested. And so other questions in this section, there's a question about lead-based paint inspections and requirements, and habitability inspections. Last year we had a couple shelters that kind of just answered with, oh, this isn't applicable to us. Just a note that it is applicable. It's applicable to all types of assistance. There are some level of requirements that apply there. So keep those in mind and read up on those if you're not sure. Keep in mind the number of points for each question is in parentheses after the question, so that gives you an idea of how much perhaps to focus on a particular question. And we have a couple questions here, just really getting at your program design, what you intend to do and how you intend to do it. How will your agency ensure that participants are assisted in obtaining mainstream services and financial assistance? Pretty important element of your program there. And questions about prioritization of clients. Keep in mind number 5 here, this is worth 8 points total, but there are some different sections to this question. So first you want to determine what does your agency provide, if it's street outreach, shelter, homelessness prevention, or rapid rehousing. And so if you do all of them, then you're going to answer every question. If you just do homelessness prevention, you just answer those questions, so and so forth. For C then has 3 parts. So that's if you're doing homelessness prevention or rapid rehousing, you're going to answer all 3 of those. A bit of an awkward format, but the idea there was to avoid having to do 3 different applications depending on what types of services agencies provided. Okay, we'll just move on to experience and capacity for a quick overview. And so we've added a few questions about budgets and fundraising. I don't have to get into all the details and build your agency's full fundraising plan here, but we want to know some basics and an overview of how things are going with your agency's fundraising. And let's see, some information about grant history, information about litigation regarding civil rights related matters, information about results of state or federal program monitoring. Keep in mind that answering yes for these questions doesn't disqualify you. Agencies answer yes all the time, and what we're looking for there is just a reasonable explanation and just to learn a little more about your agency's capacity in these areas. And we have a new question here about the percentage rate of staff turnover at your agency. I think there's probably lots of different ways to calculate this, so keep in mind we are specifying a particular calculation, so please do follow this formula. And then also show, don't just give us a number or a percentage, you want to show us your calculation. So kind of like your, back in high school, show your work so we can follow along. Let's see, with key training and staff development activities during the past 3 years. including the dates and topics of major training. That's a new question, but fairly self-explanatory. And let's see, describe the results of your agency's most recent audit or independent reviewed financial statements. Occasionally we have had agencies reply to this kind of question and just say not applicable. And so we don't want that. We want you to definitely answer. Every agency has to submit financial statements, so it is applicable to everybody. If you don't have findings or concerns, please specify that so there's no confusion over what part of this may or may not be applicable to your agency. And the oversight provided by your agency's board of directors, again, just a question about general agency capacity. We don't need a ton of information, but we want some basics here. List of members, how often the board meets, average meeting attendance during the past year, and key decisions or activities during the past year. Okay, that is experience and capacity section. We'll go on to community partnerships. And this section has undergone just a few changes as well. We used to have a separate section for identified community need, and we sort of pulled in that section into this section here. So pretty straightforward, I think. First, we want to know what are the geographic boundaries for your community. As in, if you're talking about local planning, what counties or cities, what does that include? What are we referring to there? So we want to specify that. And then you want to talk about how local homeless service providers in your community are communicating and planning together, and who participates, how often does the group meet, et cetera, et cetera. Essentially, how is your community working together to try to achieve progress with some common goals regarding homelessness? And how is your agency particularly participating in the planning body that you describe? We want to know the most pressing barriers to stable housing in your community. And question, this is not new this year, but how does your agency and your community help ensure that other providers in your community are participating in the HMIS or the Homeless Management Information System or the comparable database for DV providers? And I think sometimes there's kind of a question from agencies, well, how do we know what other agencies are participating? And so this question is actually kind of putting that back on agencies and asking agencies to determine, well, how do you know? What does your community do together to try to identify that and then try to ensure that agencies are participating? And so the goal there is that we want agencies to participate, both because that provides us better data on how our homeless programs and how our homeless systems and planning, how that's doing overall and where we can improve. And then just the very sort of functional reality there that for HUD programs, for the Continuum of Care program in particular, HUD expects that our state and our communities that we will have 100% participation in that HMIS system. So we're graded on that, we're scored on that, and funding for other programs can be dependent on that. So it's important that we're working towards that as an entire community. And then the last question here, list and describe the top 5 community partnerships that impact or help support your client's success. And so this could be new partnerships or existing partnerships. But what are the top 5 key partnerships here? We don't need to know everybody that you partner with. We don't need a long list. We just want to focus in on what are the really key ones that are really important to the success of your program. And that's where 10 points are. Okay, and we just have a couple more sections here. Performance outcome measurement. This section is fairly similar to years past. One addition is that if you are a new agency or you haven't been using HMIS or the comparable database for DV services providers, there is the option to still provide alternative reports. And so last year we didn't really even offer that at all. The expectation was really that for ESG, we just had new interim federal regulations that were pretty rigorous and pretty different from the past. It was really we were expecting that most agencies would not be new. So, but this year we at least have that option. So instructions are included there if that fits your agency. And so first we have briefly summarized the results of the reports that are included with your application. And so if you're submitting a report and it really just, you feel for some reason it doesn't reflect your success in an appropriate way, or you think there's some other better measure of your program success that the report doesn't capture, then you're certainly, this would be the place to describe that in this first question here that's worth 10 points. So a pretty important question. We just want to know what are the results of the report, what does the data say about your program, and if you're using other reports, what do those reports say about your program as well. And then we're also always concerned about data completeness and quality. So this question gets at that. And of course, data timeliness is important as well. Data timeliness ultimately plays into data quality, so both important measures. And how else have you determined if the assistance provided by your program is effective? And let's see the last one, I believe. Based on your agency's current outcome measures, where do you see the greatest opportunity to make improvements in how services are provided? Okay, here we have a budget section, pretty straightforward. So you will provide in the table your budget numbers, and then the second question here, you want to actually provide a narrative explanation, and that's required for everybody. And in the past, we've just required the table, just the straight numbers, but really it helps us to have an explanation for why agencies are entering the numbers they are. So here is the place to do that, and that question is also worth 4 points. Certainly, if you're asking for outside the typical range of $50,000 to $100,000, definitely want to have a solid explanation here as well. And then as far as matching contributions, we discussed that. And so here is where you're just going to specify what are you planning to use for match. Then we have a link to a little more information here. And then finally, we have the exhibit. And nothing new on the exhibits. Actually, we took out one of the previous exhibits that was required that turned out to be a little confusing. And so here we're left with just the audit or review financial statement, which is required. The most recently filed IRS Form 990, that's only required for nonprofit agencies. If you're a unit of general local government, you're not going to have this particular form. A certificate of standing also just required for nonprofit agencies. Should be a valid and active certificate of standing. And if you don't have one handy, it can be obtained online for a fee of $5 from the Office of the Secretary of State. And such certificate will be considered current if it was printed or obtained sometime in the past 12 months. And performance outcome reports, the directions to print those reports are, well, they're found here, and they're also found in the performance outcome measurement section. And so you're going to actually upload the reports into this section and then comment and discuss the reports in the performance outcome measurement section. And then threshold assurances, just something you print out and read through and sign. And then letters of support or memoranda of understanding are optional, but you could upload letters there to support your answers in the community partnership section. Okay, and you're going to use this functionality here, little tool at the bottom to actually upload your exhibit. And then you're done. So when you're finished and you've reviewed it, you want to hit submit up here. And it won't let you submit unless you've answered all the required questions. So at the left here, you probably have to see all green checks before it'll let you submit. So, but then you're done and you'll get a confirmation email and you're good to go. Just keep in mind, again, that don't look at this competition priority section and think, oh, I'm done with that. because you see a green check, you actually want to go through and answer them if you'd like to. This is the one where the questions are not required, but there's the option for additional points. So you want to make sure you've identified questions that you'd want to answer there. And actually, I think I must have skipped over this section earlier. But here's where you have a little more detail about these application priorities and how you can earn points in each question. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up our review of the actual application. And so again, questions, reach out please to me or Josh at any time. And we'll go ahead and it's about, I think it's about 1 o'clock right now. Oh, I'm sorry, 2 o'clock. So we will go ahead and continue to answer questions here. So, but we have made it through to the end of our official presentation. So thank you for bearing with us through that. I hope it was helpful, and we'll continue to just scroll through here and pull up any questions that we may be able to answer right here. Okay, we've got a couple long questions, so bear with us. We're just scrolling through them. Okay, question, how far back can we go in order to use a habitability inspection that has already been completed? Within 12 months of the date, we awarded LIHEAP funds. I'm not totally sure that I'm following the wording of the question, but I think the intent is basically how far back or how recent does the habitability inspection have to be in order to use it for the ESG program? And I researched this question recently. I don't think there's anything really straightforward from HUD as far as the ESG program goes, but I think other guidance from other programs seem to indicate about 12 months. To be current, it really needs to be within the last 12 months. So that's the general guidance we're providing. Of course, if we learn something different from HUD, we'll certainly forward that on. I'm going to read this question. I'm not positive I'll have an answer, but I'll go ahead and read it. We are in the process of selecting a new security system, which will probably be installed before January 1st. Will this match be allowed, or must the expense be made within calendar year 2014? And really what we're asking for is for expenses that match up with a grant year. So for this particular competition, where it's the 2014 grant year, I think we would mostly expect the matching expenses to also come in during the 2014 grant year. And as far as the kind of billing, you always have this billing question of when an expense is actually incurred and when it's billed. And generally, we look for when it was actually incurred and not just when it was billed. So if there's more detail to that question, or if there's a more thorough response needed, please follow up by email later, and we can take another look. But that's my quick 10-second response. A question here is our definition for chronically homeless. A really good question, and there's a link in the application to HUD's definition for chronically homeless, which actually just came out within the last several weeks. And HUD's definition for chronically homeless is embedded within their definition for the Rural Housing Stability Program. I don't know why they do that. It seems to me like it'd be more straightforward if they had it on its own, but they don't. And so not the most user-friendly thing, but you do have to pull up the actual regulations for the Rural Housing Stability Program. I think those regulations are probably in either interim or draft form or proposed form. And so anyways, pull those up, and then you see there will be definitions for chronically homeless. So again, there's a link to that within the application itself. Okay, let's see. Question, can foundations that assist homeless folks apply for the ESG? So foundations, so let's see, eligible applicants for the ESG program are private nonprofit corporations and units of general local government. So generally, most eligible nonprofit agencies will have a 501c3 designation. That's not always the case. We've done a little research in the past, and there are some faith-based groups that sometimes have a slightly different designation. I want to say it's something like 501A9 or something like that that can be eligible as well, but typically it's 501c3, and so it just depends on, I guess, the legal setup of the foundation. I think I need just a little bit more information to answer that one more thoroughly. Okay, there's just a couple questions that are just a little bit longer, more technical in nature. I'm going to hold off on those and respond individually to some folks about their questions. Okay, and let's see. Question here, it may be a problem meeting a match of $50,000. Can we ask for less to be sure we meet the match? And yes, I think so. Our $50,000 to $100,000 is our guideline, but absolutely, if an agency is confident they can meet, say, $30,000 in match and they want to ask for $30,000, I think you want to explain that in your budget section or the match. I think it's the budget section where you'll have an opportunity to explain that. And I think that's very reasonable. I think if your application scores well otherwise, my guess is that the application scores would not look unfavorably on that. It's important that we meet our match requirements. So again, that $50,000 to $100,000 guideline, we don't want to be making a lot of grants for, say, $5,000 to $10,000. I mean, really, probably not in quite that range. The issue there is just that it can be a challenging program. There certainly are some significant requirements to meet, and so for an agency to make the investment in the ESG program, we want it to be worth their while. We want the grant to be large enough that it's reasonable to expect an agency to meet the requirements. So that's the goal there. Okay, and we may have answered almost all the questions that came in. Let's see, well, I'm going to go ahead and scroll through and see if anybody has clicked their little raised hand icon, and we'll see if we can open it up to audio for anybody that was wanting to submit a question that way. Okay, I'll apologize for singling you out here, but Jamie Whitney, I saw your hand was raised. You are unmuted if it works. So did you still have a question that you'd like to submit? Okay. Didn't hear back, that's okay. Okay, so I do not see any further questions. And so if anybody thinks of questions later and wants to submit by email or by giving us a call, perfect, great. So once again, thank you so much for joining the webinar today and for your interest in the ESG program. And we certainly look forward to reading the applications that come in.